Hey, how's it going, guys? Chris here. Today we're going to be watching, it's official, Australia about to enter stagflation. If you guys are new to the channel, we do a lot of videos about the Australian economy, and if that interests you, make sure to subscribe and let's get into it. Full video is linked below, as always.
Well, unfortunately now we're seeing the prospect of stagflation rearing its ugly head here because last week we saw inflation running hot.
The RBA says unemployment will need to rise to tackle inflation.
The government is good at one thing. It knows how to drive up inflation and the cost of living by a lot, and then increase the minimum wage by a little and say, see, if it weren't for the government, you wouldn't be able to pay your bills.
Fellas, prepare yourself. Australia is entering the economic nightmare that destroyed the 1970s. Stagflation is back, and it's about to crush every single Australian family.
It was panic. 16.5 million shares of stock sold in a single day. Sold hopelessly, desperately, at any price.
Many are beyond joking. A report from Detroit says men are sitting in the parks all day long, out of work, muttering to themselves.
Australia at the moment is pretty far away from high unemployment. We have been looking at on the channel, like a lot of US jobs are getting, a lot of people in the US are getting mass layoffs. I think I heard there was a mass layoff recently, actually in Australia. Try and get the data on that. But yeah, if you don't know what stagflation is, it's when there's high unemployment, high inflation, and low economic growth. So the economy's not really growing, but yet everything's getting more expensive. So during COVID, we saw high inflation. However, the economy was technically growing. It was growing quite fast, actually, if you looked at stocks and whatnot, even though stocks aren't an accurate representation on how the economy is going. It shows that, stuff was going up in price, and assets in particular, as well as, your general cost of goods. But, I can't, mass layoffs, Australia. So Telstra's cutting jobs. That's Microsoft laying off 4% of global workforce, so there'll be a lot of jobs lost in Australia too from that. But there's no real, once the job market really goes into a deep dive, there's no real stopping it, and that's the scary part. And that's probably why the RBA is not lowering the cash rate at the moment. They're keeping it at the interest rate at 4.85% or whatever it is, because they're just trying to prevent this free fall of the economy, which obviously no one wants. Let's keep going.
Some succumb to apathy. Some are swept by alarm, and bank after bank across the country is hit by panic withdrawals.
Stagflation. It's the word that strikes fear into the heart of every economist and should terrify every Australian. It's when your economy stops growing while prices keep skyrocketing, the worst of both worlds. You get all the pain of a recession with all the misery of runaway inflation. The last time we saw stagflation was in the 1970s, and it took over a decade to fix. Unemployment soared, businesses collapsed, and families watched their savings evaporate while struggling to afford basic necessities. And now it's happening again in Australia.
I will say, if it is actually going to happen, it's going to be even worse, because people don't even have savings at the moment. Over the last 2 to 3, 4 years, people have struggled to get by because we've had such high inflation, and people that, are renting or even have a mortgage have had to pay so much in housing costs, so much in petrol costs, so much in, food prices. Everything's really, really expensive. However, we're starting to see actually the opposite of inflation at the moment. You know, rents are, I think I just heard that rents have actually eased off on the increasing. Most rent over the last couple months has actually remained flat or only a slight increase. So hopefully we can leave all that crazy inflation behind. Yeah, if we are destined for a recession, hopefully it's just a recession and not inflation at the same time, and then we're really, really struggling otherwise.
The warning signs are everywhere, but the government and mainstream media are pretending everything is fine. They're lying to you. Today, I'm going to show you exactly why Australia is sliding into stagflation, what it means for your family, and why this could be the beginning of the worst economic crisis in our lifetime.
Our assessment is that for the first time in decades, firms' demand for labour exceeds the amount of labour that people are willing and able to supply. That is, employment is above what we would consider to be consistent with our inflation target. One of the channels through which higher interest rates work to bring down inflation is by reducing the demand for goods and services, and hence overall demand for labour. What this means is that the labour market conditions will invariably soften as inflation is contained.
The stagflation trap. Stagflation breaks all the rules. You get economic stagnation and rising prices at the same time. It's like being trapped in quicksand while someone sets you on fire. The economy can't grow because businesses can't afford to expand, but prices keep rising because the government keeps printing money.
The national economy is pedestrian at best. We've seen 2 reductions to the cash rate this year and more may be required. The economy grew by just 1.3% in the 12 months to March
And see, okay, yeah, we're having still growth in the economy, but look at how many people are getting pushed into the country, right? So without all this immigration, we would actually be in a recession. So the government's really trying to, you know, make sure everything looks all right and everything's going really well by just increasing the number of people that can work and produce for government taxes and the purpose of GDP. But in reality, we're technically already in a recession. Per capita recession we're already in that. So yeah, assuming that we continue having high immigration, which there's no signs of that stopping, will technically maybe bypass the official definition of a recession. However, if you ask your general person, are we in a recession? Are times tough? The answer is going to be yes, even though you're employed, even though you're making more money than what you've ever made before. Everything else just costs even more than it ever has. And it's not a great time to be an Australian citizen.
just 0.2% in the first 3 months of the year. Households are now going backwards again with GDP per capita at negative 0.2%. These numbers are worse than had been forecast by economists and are before Donald Trump's tariff regime properly started to take effect. The global economy and investors are battling uncertainty due to the US president's trade policies, and Reserve Bank Governor Michelle Bullock will be looking closely at these GDP numbers.
Now, fellas, Australia is showing every single warning sign right now. Our GDP growth has collapsed to just 0.2% in the first quarter of 2025, barely above recession levels. Meanwhile, inflation expectations have jumped to 5%, the highest level since 2023. We're entering the stagflation death spiral, and our economic managers are about as useful as a chocolate teapot. The growth collapse. Australia's economic growth has fallen off a cliff. But here's the real shocker. GDP per person fell by 0.2% in the March quarter. That means the average Australian is getting poorer, while the government claims the economy is growing. What a brilliant achievement! The OECD is forecasting Australia's GDP will hit just 1.7% by year's end, well below our historical average. Some economists are warning we could see growth fall below 1% if global conditions deteriorate. This isn't a temporary blip. We've destroyed our manufacturing sector, made ourselves completely dependent on China, and loaded up on so much debt that we can't afford productive investment. Fellas, we've managed to turn the lucky country into the unlucky country in record time. The inflation...
It is scary to think that we once had it all, and you know what has caused this. I guess you can look at corporate greed, government greed. You look at how much Albo's paying himself. He's paying himself, you know, $400,000 a year. I think it's like $600,000 a year. And you know, the other politicians are on 200 to 300, and you know that's you know, obviously they need to get paid some sort of money. A livable salary would be, I think, justified, because they, you know, like Albo would get paid $600,000 for the rest of his life now. He doesn't need that much money. Like, he should be getting paid what the average Australian gets paid, because then he would actually give a shit about policies that he, you know, is putting forward. Because at the end of the day, the policies that are getting put into this country are not policies that the every Australian's going to benefit from. The policies are inflate house prices so much with immigration, and, you know, not increasing the supply in a fast enough fashion, which you'd never be able to build enough houses. Like, the Australian, like, there's too much red tape, and Australia, like, honestly, they sort of need it, because there was a video I did not long ago that a house went from 900K to just 170K because, you know, people can still get through all these red tape. Even with all the red tape, they can, you know, build crap houses that are just moldy and falling apart in just like 4 or 5 years. So, yeah, it's just a crap situation where we have all this regulation, but yet still people are suffering, even with all the regulation, and the regulation just holds up the production. Like, it takes, I think, an extra year on average for a house to be built now, because there's too much delays on the building side of things. Like, there's not enough labor, and then there's the restrictions on, like, the government. Like, government's like restricting people from building houses. So it's crazy.
Treasurer, welcome to the program.
Thanks very much, David.
This easing of inflation today was better than expected. What does it mean in terms of further cost of living relief from the government?
Well, these new numbers out today show that we are making welcome and encouraging progress, but it's not yet mission accomplished in this fight against inflation. We know that people are still under pressure, even as inflation has come off substantially from its peaks in 2022. We've made some good progress, but we need to go further because people are still under the pump.
The government wants you to believe inflation is under control at 2.4%. That's a lie. The official figure is manipulated through statistical tricks and government subsidies that temporarily mask real cost increases. They give you electricity rebates to bring down the headline number while your actual bills keep rising. It's like putting a band-aid on a broken leg and claiming you fixed the problem. Here's what's really happening, fellas. Housing costs are up 1.7% in just 1 quarter. Education costs have exploded by 5.2%. The Living Cost Index, which measures what families actually pay, shows increases up to 6.4% annualised. The real inflation rate for ordinary families is at least double the official figure. The unemployment time bomb. The unemployment rate sits at 4.1%, and the government is celebrating this as success. But youth unemployment is already at 9.2%. Nearly 1 in 10 young Australians can't find work.
Australia's workforce is on the precipice of major upheaval. CEOs of our biggest companies are warning their human headcount will shrink as a result of advances in artificial intelligence. For now, though, Australia's labour market is holding up. The unemployment rate has remained steady at 4.1% for 5 months in a row. In May, there were 2,500 fewer people employed, but more than 5,000 decided to give up looking for work, pushing the participation rate down to 67%, which kept unemployment steady.
Here's the kicker.
It's so funny how unemployment rates can be manipulated, right? they're only looking at people that are actively looking for work, but it doesn't account for people that are underemployed, not working enough hours. And the fact is, most people that work 40 hours a week are not able to get by on that salary that they're making, right? So that like, even though they've got 40 hours a week, they're still underemployed, which is crazy to think about. And that doesn't show up in the data. And then you look at 10% unemployed for young people, and it's only going to keep rising because entry-level jobs are now becoming more demanding, right? You need actually experience, which, I mean, that's always been the case. Entry-level jobs, like, they require, more experience over time. They just keep getting more and more competitive. And the reason for that is because at the end of the day, if there's more people for a company to choose from, they're going to pick the most experienced person. And with AI, it's just going to become more and more challenging because people in higher up roles might lose their job, so they have to take whatever job they can, and that might be an entry-level job. And you also look at the cost of training people. It's expensive to train someone to do a job, so you want to get the most, proficient candidate, someone that actually knows what they're doing.
Employment fell unexpectedly in May, despite the unemployment rate staying flat. That's because people are dropping out of the workforce entirely. When people stop looking for work, they're not counted as unemployed, but they're still not earning income. Brilliant statistical magic there. Most new jobs are part-time, casual or government-funded positions. Private sector employment is weak because businesses can't afford to expand in this high-cost environment. The government's failed response. Now, fellas, guess what our brilliant government has done in response to this crisis? They've increased spending to over $1 trillion in debt, adding inflationary pressure. They've expanded bureaucracy and added regulations that make it harder for businesses to operate. Their energy policies have made electricity more expensive and less reliable. Their immigration policies have flooded the labour market while creating massive demand for housing we don't have.
The cumulative debt of federal, state and territory governments is expected to exceed $1.2 trillion in the coming financial year. The Treasurer, Jim Chalmers, admitted last week that there was renewed pressure on state and federal governments to rein in their spending. As the Commonwealth guarantees, the state's economists warn the nation's credit rating could fall, leading to lower ratings.
The RBA is trapped. If they cut rates to boost growth, inflation will explode. If they raise rates to fight inflation, the economy will collapse. There's no good option because they've created the perfect stagflation storm. It's like watching someone try to put out a fire with petrol. Hit subscribe to see more unfiltered truth about Australia's economic disaster. Cost of living catastrophe. For ordinary families, stagflation means a devastating squeeze from both sides. The Woolworths survey revealed that nearly half of Australian households are already struggling to make ends meet, with grocery bills now their number one concern. Young people are being completely priced out of the housing market. Even those with good jobs can't afford homes because prices rise faster than wages. They're trapped in expensive rental markets with no hope of building wealth. Retirees on fixed incomes are watching their purchasing power evaporate. Many are being forced back into the workforce just to survive. Small business owners are being crushed between rising costs and weak demand. They can't raise prices enough to cover expenses because customers can't afford to pay more. Fellas, it's like being squeezed in a vice while someone keeps turning the handle.
See, the whole problem is you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't, right? Pretty much everyone's reliant on the government at this point because, your actual independent private businesses, if they don't do work for the government, they, one, don't pay enough, two, they don't employ enough people to make a difference, and I don't know, it's just, it's crap in every situation you look at it. Hopefully we somehow magically miss any sort of economic downturn. I think if you think there is no chance of an economic downturn, then you're, living under a rock. But yeah, I think I'm going to end this video here, guys. Comment down below what you guys think. Love to hear it, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Later.